Good morning. Here it says how to be prepared for quantum computing and insurance. In the next slide, we'll actually give the title I want to use. Because, there we go. Do you need to care? So there's some maths in quantum computing. I'm going to touch on an easy bit of maths now, which is Venn diagrams. So this is the circle of insurance. There's a lot going on in insurance. This is the circle of quantum computing. There's a reasonable amount going on there. The overlap of these two circles is just about nothing. Now that's good, right? And when I was talking to Jesper about whether or not to speak at this event, I explained that there's two circles and they're not overlapping, and we concluded actually that that makes a really good reason for why to talk. Two is because in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, however long it is, when those two have overlapped, you guys can say, we were there at the beginning. Because I genuinely believe that there is going to be, across all industries, and therefore insurance as a result, a paradigm shift in a lot of what we do as a result of quantum computing. And so if you're thinking, hey, we knew about it before everyone else, believe me, that'll feel good in 5 years' time. The other reason for having this conversation now is because I hate blockchain. And this, some of you will emphasize this, some of you will utterly disagree. But if this had been a few years back, and I was going to give a blockchain and insurance conversation, I would be on the main stage. There would be people cramming in the doors to try and hear. Because blockchain, the best thing that blockchain did was its PR exercise. As a technology, it's yet to achieve much. Now, I think it's a fundamentally important technology, both now and for the future, but it did us all a disservice by overhyping itself. Now, what I do not want to happen is that quantum computing overhypes itself. Now, this is already happening in some other industries, but I'm kind of keen that everyone who's here hears about this, thinks that's interesting, and the penultimate slide is my views on some steps to get quantum ready, and then you kind of forget about it. And then in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, when it's really getting somewhere, and it's the type of thing that is relevant for us to be taking to our executives and saying, hey, this is something we should be thinking about, then we'll do it. So that's my aim. Now, I'm therefore, with 15 or so minutes left, going to try and give you enough information for you to be comfortable about why it's going to be important, but why you don't need to care now. So this over here is the block sphere, and that explains what's going on in quantum computing. Now, I'm not going to try and explain that, luckily. But what I'm going to say is just, I think, the one technical term probably that you need to know, which is the term qubit. So you've all heard of bits. Obviously, our computers have been running with bits and bytes for forever. And obviously, every digital device we have is essentially running with bits, which have two states, an on and off. Qubits, quantum bits, have the ability to be in more than one state. And so for those of you who are mathematical, you can start to understand that maybe on the surface of this sphere is the ability to encode more information than simply a 1 or a 0. Now, when I try and explain this to people who don't want to care about a diagram like that, I think about it a little bit like a coin toss. So if you're holding the coin, it's either heads or tails. You flick it, when it comes back into your hand, it's either heads or tails. As it's going up and spinning, it's obviously got additional dimensions that come into play. Now, that is fundamentally a flawed explanation. If any of you know anything about quantum computing, you'll be looking at me now thinking, what is this guy saying? But for the 99% of you who don't know anything, sort of try and think about it a little bit like that. Now, the qubits, which therefore can hold meaningfully more information than an individual bit, can be made in all sorts of ways. And if we had 2 hours on this topic, we'd be talking about the different types of qubit, the different types of quantum computer, the way that companies like IBM and Google and a whole range of really exciting startups are doing fundamentally different things. But essentially, from your points of view as sort of people focused on how do you create business value, you don't need to understand anything beyond the fact that the qubit can hold more information than the traditional bit. And as we'll get to in a minute, what quantum computers can therefore do is take a certain set of computational challenges and do it in a meaningfully more efficient manner. So when I'm explaining this, not at a technology level, but at a paradigm shift level, I think about it like this. So the what, not the how, is important. So if you've got 2 salespeople, Archie and Betty, and they drive around in their car doing their job as salespeople. What you say to Archie is, hey, we'll get you a faster car. Archie can then get to more meetings, get there more quickly, doing really well. You get him a train ticket, you buy him an aeroplane, whatever. He is able to get to more customers and do more sales work. And that is essentially the equivalent of our computers having got faster over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And now with supercomputers, with cloud, etc., you can essentially give a sort of near infinite amount of computing power for someone to tackle a problem. Now, what you're saying to Betty is, we're not giving you an aeroplane or a train or a faster car. We're giving you video conferencing. We're giving you Microsoft Teams. We're giving you WebEx. What does that mean? Betty is still a salesperson, but suddenly she can talk to someone on the West Coast for one meeting and then be talking to someone in Italy for the next meeting. Or she can get people from across the globe into the same meeting. That is a fundamental paradigm shift. She is still doing the same thing. She's being a salesperson, but what we've done is we've given her a different tool. And so if we think of quantum computing as essentially still doing calculations, but there are certain calculations that will be done meaningfully differently. And what we mean meaningfully differently is it will be able to solve things that a traditional computer can't. So, there's a whole load of numbers out there, but essentially there's stuff that will take 100,000 years with the fastest current supercomputer that a quantum computer will do in an hour. That's sort of the difference. And I don't know if it's, I'll show you in a minute, a slide of sort of how we're thinking about this, that it's defining a whole new question set that we'll answer. Now, very briefly on the timeline of quantum computing. So this all started theoretically in the 1980s, and then in the 1990s became a little bit more serious as this chap, Peter Shaw, with the typo, embarrassingly, Peter Shaw identified that you could use quantum computers theoretically for factorizing, finding prime factors of integers. This is important because that, in theory, undermines a lot of the cryptography we use, and we'll touch on in a minute that side of things. 2-qubit quantum computer was built 25 or so years ago. And recently we've had a 54-qubit one, and we're getting to 60. And IBM's latest was 433. So those of you who are sort of doing the numbers in your head, this is the very beginning, ideally, of an exponential growth curve. Now, we don't know. We need to wait and see. This diagram on the right, and it's still illegible here, but that's fine. I just want to show this as this is the IBM quantum roadmap. You don't need to care about the details. You just need to understand that IBM, who are one of the leaders in this, have got a very clear view of where they want to be heading out over the next few years. And these green ticks are showing that they have basically been achieving their aims over the last few years. So there's a sort of real hope that this exponential curve does actually, as it starts to grow. And that's important because to do anything useful, you need thousands, tens of thousands, millions of these qubits, just as the unit of measure. And at the moment, we're getting excited because we've got 433 of them. We're also in what's called the NISQ era. So this is a phrase as and when we start talking more broadly about this topic that you'll hear. NISQ stands for Noisy Intermediate Stage Quantum. The noisy, for those of you who are physicists or engineers, refers to the fact that there's a lot of noise within the system and therefore inaccuracies constantly being brought in. And what that means is essentially these basically you still can't do a lot that's much use when you're in the NISQ era. What you need to do is you need to move to these error-corrected quantum computing. And so I've written 5 to 10 years. We could write 3 to 20, we could write 8 to 50, nobody knows. Now, if we were talking 5 or 10 years ago, this was very much a case of maybe at some point in the future we will. We're now at a point, back to that IBM chart, where we're seeing the ability to genuinely increase the number of qubits. And so there is no reason to think that as humans, as engineers, as scientists, we can't continue to grow those number of qubits. And so therefore we'll get to the point where the quantum computers are error corrected and have enough qubits to start to do useful things. Now, a key point I want you to remember is this one here, where I mentioned the word cloud, which of course is a sort of buzzword of the decade, I guess. These quantum computers, you will not buy one to put in your basement at work. They will sit, and obviously a few people, the German government's bought one, there's a healthcare provider in America that's wanting to buy one. But they will sit at Google, at IBM, at Amazon with some of these startups, and then you'll access it via the cloud as a service. And I think this is a really important point to reflect on, because that means the cost of trying to do stuff with quantum computers is very manageable for sort of executives to understand. If we go back 30 or 40 years and the executive decision was, do we spend an unfathomable amount of money on a mainframe? That was a very big, very specific decision, and you had to really understand, well, which one would we buy and what's it going to cost and what does it look like? The ability to use quantum computing as a service via the cloud means that essentially you can start tomorrow, and IBM already offer a free service where you can go and run basic quantum coding. And it means that there's not going to be, in theory, any type of major fixed cost. And I think that's incredibly sort of positive and powerful in terms of how any individual person or individual company can engage with it. So that's something to bear in mind, you know, as and when it becomes a topic that you're discussing with clients or with executives in your company, is that you haven't got that big fixed cost. You also haven't got the old Betamax VHS worry about technology, because whilst there are fundamentally different quantum computing technologies sitting at this layer, you as an individual user, as a company engaging with it, will engage with all sorts of levels of abstraction, and therefore you don't need to worry. Now, there's a view that different types of hardware are going to be better for solving different types of problem, but you know, certainly in the opening years where we're all sort of trying to learn how this can be useful, we can essentially consider ourselves entirely hardware agnostic, which again removes a whole load of risk. Now, is it just a buzzword? The numbers say differently. So, you know, if we think back to 2013, I don't think this conference was running then, but there were sort of equivalents where, you know, we were all slowly thinking about AI and what AI might mean. So here we are now, 10 or so years later, and it is quite clear, and, you know, you'll have been to a whole range of presentations over the last day and a half where, you know, AI is clearly becoming a genuine driver of change. The investment in quantum is already, or in 21, was already meaningfully more than what was happening just a decade ago in AI. Now, it's not a perfect comparison because quantum computing involves hardware, and there's also certain areas of quantum technology that have nothing to do with the computing point we're focusing on. And obviously any investment in software like AI is intrinsically less capital intensive than in software. But just to give a sense that this is not, I would imagine, a fad. We've got proper money and we've got proper players. IBM, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Intel as names you'll know. And then the likes of D-Wave, Rigetti, etc., who are as sort of the emerging leaders in the space. So believe it's not a buzzword. Right, types of use. I like to think about it 3 types of use. One is optimization, so essentially optimization exercises. Another is simulations of essentially physical properties, and then quantum machine learning. The question for us as in the insurance space is which one is this most relevant? And it's mainly going to be up here, because if we look at the type of examples that are already really being thought about in other industries, optimization of transportation, the ability to say, right, I have 2,000 nodes in my logistics business with warehouses, with trucks, with ships and everything, that optimizing that. And there's a problem that somebody will be aware of called the traveling salesman problem. Quantum computers, it looks like the way they work will be perfectly designed to optimize this in a way that cannot be effectively optimized by even our most powerful classical computers. So essentially the traveling salesman problem says if you've got a certain number of nodes, say you've got 10 nodes in the US and the UK, and you want to optimize the journey of your salesman between them in terms of distance, time, use of petrol, whatever the variables might be, how do you optimize for that? Now, as a problem, every time you add an additional node, then it becomes meaningfully more computationally complex. There's a challenge that once it gets to a certain size, you can't optimize that for a normal computer. The way that quantum computers look at it, which is fundamentally different, allows them to tackle an additional node without any meaningful additional time. So, yeah, if you're running an airline, if you're running a logistics organization, it's relevant. If you're planning a new city, so you want to build a new 2 million person city in Saudi Arabia, you can essentially model it in a way that is utterly unimaginable in terms of everything from the link of traffic lights to bus journeys, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the optimization side. Not entirely clear to me yet where and how that's relevant in insurance. The simulation side touches drug design, new materials, car battery components, et cetera, whereby the way the quantum computer can simulate the interaction of the proteins in the case of drug design, et cetera, looks like it will be able to remove entire steps, removing sort of 6 or 12 months from processes. And again, that could be meaningful. And then it's sort of all these a little bit come together in the overarching thing of climate, which of course is another buzzword of the moment. There's a whole load of things we're trying to do in climate. For example, better batteries. There's a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which is used for making fertilizer, which apparently uses 1% to 2% of the world's gas just to produce fertilizer. That is a process that was designed over 100 years ago and has never been optimized. There's a hope and sense that when the quantum computers are powerful enough that they will be able to simulate that process, thereby meaningfully reducing the amount of CO2 produced. So there's a whole load of possible uses. Now, as I said, there isn't an insurance one there. And so I look at it through two lenses. One is I say, if you work in insurance, actually what you care about most of the time is what your clients are doing. And what I mean by that is not who your individual clients are, but conceptually what insurers need to do is they need to deal with an evolving risk landscape. And so the question for an underwriter, an actuary, a CRO, and an insurer is what does this mean in terms of what the companies I'm working with are doing? And my answer on the whole would be not much from a risk point of view. And what do I mean? If we think about AI, if we think about 3D printing, these technologies are fundamentally changing how companies are working, how supply chains are working. And therefore, the risks embedded in those companies are fundamentally changing. So as an underwriter, as an actuary, you are caring about the fact that the risks are changing because of technology. I would argue that on the whole, what quantum computing is doing is speeding up stuff. And if all it's doing is speeding up stuff, then that's not inherently bringing a whole load of new risks. Because I'm sure you might say, oh, well, in the old days, we would do a whole lot of sort of human tests, and now we're trusting a computer to do drug design. Maybe that does create new risks. But generally speaking, my view is that unlike some of the new evolving technologies we've got, and again, AI and 3D printing, to my mind, are the biggest examples of utterly disruptive technologies, and therefore fundamental changes in the risks that brokers and underwriters need to care about, that isn't the case with quantum computing at this point. I'll just jump back to this slide here. These are problems that we as humanity can address today. Okay? On the outside, problems that we can't adequately address today. Crudely speaking, and this isn't to scale or anything, obviously, but with quantum technology, we can move beyond the problems we can address today. And this white one, of course, is growing, both with our intellect and with more powerful computers. But quantum computers should meaningfully increase the problems we can't address today, as well as not touching all sorts of stuff that's just not relevant. But also it'll take us out here. It'll take us to a place where we can ask questions that we previously couldn't. And if any of you are actuaries or catastrophe modelers or work in that space, think back to when we first started putting CAT models onto the cloud. And we went from a world where you would have to plan a heck of a lot, because then you would have 3 or 4 or 5 days runtime of your models, and if you'd done it wrong or you want to do some scenario analysis, that was a problem, to a world now where actually you can run your models far, far fast. You can take an entirely different approach around testing scenarios. If you happen to make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. So I think that we'll start, people, 5 or 10 years' time when it's there, will start to be able to ask fundamentally new questions. So it's just a minute or two left. Is there an existential risk if you're not engaging? And some of you will smile because I used this same slide, so there's very good memories in 2017 when talking about InsurTechs and incumbent insurers. And most of the incumbent insurers are still around, yeah? I don't believe that quantum computing is an existential risk. I don't believe that moving too slowly puts you at fundamental risk. So I don't want you leaving and going saying we've got to start thinking about quantum computing, got to invest in it. I do think, however, that anyone who believes when it comes to technology that being a fast follower is effective needs to understand what they mean about fast follower. So the crude analogy is if you've got someone zooming past you in a race car, and I saw some Formula One cars downstairs, imagine that those of you who watch F1, if you've got someone overtaking you and you're already moving and you can just put your foot on the gas and try and keep up, that's one scenario. If you're parked in the pit lane, fiddling with your car and the other guy goes past, by the time you've finished getting the car ready and you're out on the track, then you are way, way, way behind. So if your understanding of fast following means that you know exactly what's going on and you're ready to put your foot on the gas at the right time, that's good. If fast follower means we'll start thinking about it when meaningful things are happening, then you're doomed. Now, that's not just quantum, right? That's any evolving technology. So therefore, my thoughts are, start talking about it. Not getting excited, not having big meetings with executives. Start talking about it. Identify someone who should be taking point on the thinking. And apologies for those of you in IT departments, but it should not be the IT function that's taking a lead on this. Start talking to potential partners, because there's an increasing number of small-scale consulting firms here thinking about it. And then when the time's right, start experimenting. To this point that you can now log into an IBM quantum computer for free. So, hope that's helpful. Food for thought. Any questions? I'll be at the back or somewhere. I don't know if we've got time for questions from the audience now or not.
They can arrange one-to-one meetings with Umbrella.
Okay, I'll hang out outside immediately after if you've got questions. I don't want to get told off for being over time. We'll take one, okay.
Yeah, just one. There was a slide we could see briefly on applications of the insurance industry. Could you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, so all that said was, one, what are the changing risks in your clients that you need to think about in insurance? And my point was the one I made, which is that that fundamentally the technology, I don't think it's evolving the risk landscape. Point two was, what does it mean for you as an insurer? And I missed a key point. The only situation I can think at the moment is those of you running Monte Carlo simulations, undoubtedly there is a role to be played at some point in the future. So if any of you are running Monte Carlo simulation for some reason, that is a point of discussion. But otherwise, there ain't nothing. Everything that we're doing with data, we've got fundamental problems around data quality, data availability. Quantum's not helping with that. Good.
Thank you.